Hey guys! So today's video is going to be my top favorite books of 2020. I thought it would just be fun to be sharing my thoughts about these books with you guys. So if you want to see my top books, top rated books, then let's get right to it. Keep on watching. I'm going in order of when I read them in 2020. So I'm going like from January to December basically. And I'm also going to be sharing my ratings, and also just by the way, I always have my Goodreads linked in the description down below if you want to keep on track with me and my reading, and also same with my Instagram. I always have that linked down below, and there is where I do more of my reviews on my Instagram. Like I don't really review on Goodreads, I just have Goodreads to like track which books I'm reading. If you want to be like more up to date with what I'm reading like on a daily basis, then go click the link to my Goodreads and my Instagram down below. Give me a follow, and yeah. Anyway, with that aside, let's get into the first book. I'm so excited. This is like, I love talking about books, and like these are my favorite books, so this is just gonna be a fun time. Anyways, the first book I have is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. If you haven't heard of this book, I don't know where you've been. If you can see this little blurb right here, it says it's going to be a Hulu original series. It already is. It came out like in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Starring Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington. Whew! Boy did I love that show, and boy did I love this book. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Just so we can get my rating out of the way. And if you don't know what this book is about, it's about these two families living in Shaker Heights, which is like a really, I want to say like a very prim and proper town. They follow all the rules, they do everything like by the book, whatever, and nobody really like deviates from like the norm in this town. There's the two families, the Richardsons, who like are Shaker Heights residents, and they've lived there like all their lives, and this is Reese Witherspoon's family. Then there's Mia Warren and her daughter. They move into Shaker Heights, and they actually move into the Richardsons' like second home in Shaker Heights. The book is basically about different like family relationships, and like the different relationships in the Richardson family versus in the Warren family. And you're also trying to figure out Mia Warren's past, basically, because Mrs. Richardson, Reese Witherspoon's character, she becomes like obsessed with Mia Warren, who is played by Kerry Washington. I didn't say that earlier, but she's played by Kerry Washington in the show. And while their kids are all like being buddy-buddy and like having all their own little drama and spending time together, Mrs. Richardson is trying to investigate further into like the mystery of Mia and her life. She thinks like something bigger is happening. Just because Mia Warren is not your conventional mom, she's an artist, and she works part-time at a restaurant being a server, but her full-time job is like being an artist. And so Mrs. Richardson like already is put off by that, you know, like because she's like, this isn't like your conventional type of job, your conventional type of like, she doesn't think it's like the right way to like raise your daughter and live your life, because you don't have like an actual job, you know, the whole like stigma with like artists and whatever. That was just like a lot of like things going on, but it's very interesting. The Richardsons have 4 kids while Mia only has 1 kid. So not only are you dealing with like the relationship between Mia and Mrs. Richardson, her name is Elena, if that helps. So you're dealing with this kind of like weird dynamic between Elena and Mia, but you're also dealing with the children, and they're like coming to age and like dealing with all these things. All 4 of the Richardson kids are in high school, and same with Mia's child, Pearl. Pearl is in high school as well. So they're all like interacting together, and there's all these like social dynamics along with like the different like family dynamics, because the Richardson family lives their lives very differently than the Warren family does. So it's just very interesting. You get to see all these different like players interacting, and like, it's just so good. It's really not anything that I expected at all. I really enjoyed my time reading this. I didn't think much of this book going into it, but it was one of my favorite reads this year. And like, I read this in like February, starting off the year pretty great. The next two books I have to share with you go kind of hand in hand. It's like the first book in a series and then the sequel. I read these basically back to back. Anyways, let's get to the titles. So the first book in the series is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, and then the sequel is The Night Country by Melissa Albert. And can we just talk about these covers? First off, I'm gonna tell you guys, I really bought this book just based off the cover. It's gorgeous. Like, look at that gold and silver reflection happening. It's gorgeous. And same with like the spine. Oh my gosh. I just loved the cover, and then the inside, you know, like the actual book was glorious, but that didn't sound good. Can we look at the inside as well? Isn't this glorious? It's glorious. And then let's just admire this one. This red and like black foiling going on is gorgeous. And then same with like the inside. It all like fits the vibe of the books very, very well. This is my favorite duology ever. Just putting that out there. So let's get into what the books are about. I'm not really going to talk about the second book that much because like spoilers if I talk about it, you know. But basically, The Hazelwood is about this girl, Alice, and her grandmother is this woman who wrote a book of 12 fairy tales, and they're like really dark fairy tales. They're not like your conventional, like really happy and like hopeful fairy tales. They're very dark. The grandmother lives in this place called the Hazelwood. That's where her estate is. You find all this out in the beginning, right? And so Alice lives with her mom. What starts this story is that her mom goes missing and leaves a note behind that says, "Stay away from the Hazelwood," which is where the grandma lives. And nobody's heard from the grandma in like years. They think that like the grandma died or something and is planning on leaving the estate to them, but it's all very ominous and like very strange, the events happening like leading up to the mother's disappearance and just everything surrounding like the grandma. Very, very strange vibes. So Alice is on this quest to try and find her mother, and like the only thing she has is this note saying to stay away from the Hazelwood. So like, what else is she supposed to do but go to the Hazelwood? Because like, assuming maybe the mom is in the Hazelwood, I don't know. It's just so good. There's so many layers to this book. Alice meets this boy along the way who is like a fan of the grandmother's 12 fairy tales book. And I didn't mention this before, but the grandmother has like a cult following with this book, but it's very hard to find the actual book for some reason. And this boy tells her like, I have a copy of the book. Like maybe the book has some clues as to like where your mom is. So her and this boy go on this journey, this quest. I said quest earlier, but they try to find Alice's mom. And that's what kicks off the story. So much more happens in this book than just trying to find the mom. Like there's magic in it, and it was so good. I don't normally read fantasy books, but this was like my favorite fantasy of the year. Like it was so good. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. And so naturally, when the second book came out, it came out in 2020, like while I was reading this book, I think, so I couldn't have timed it better. But so The Night Country is obviously the sequel. I can't tell you much about it because then it'll like spoil what happened in the first book. But just know that I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars as well. Again, there's so much magic in these books and stuff to do with like the fairy tales that the grandmother wrote. It's just so good. So if you're in need for like a quick little duology, this is a phenomenal duology. I highly recommend. Okay, I got a little excited and I skipped over a book that I read before the Hazelwood and the Night Country that it is in my top books of the year. It's called Educated by Tara Westover, and it's about this woman who, she lives in like a very poor family. There's like 5 or 6 siblings and they live with their mom and dad who like barely have a high school education, and their dad doesn't believe in like sending his children to school. They talk a lot more in depth about like the dad's issues, but he kind of doesn't believe in like the whole education system, and he thinks that like the government is corrupt and all this stuff. So he pulls his kids out of school and they don't have like a high school education. Like I think some of the older kids, maybe the oldest 2 or 3 of them have somewhat of a high school education, but Tara, she's one of the younger ones, she doesn't have a high school education. So the whole book is about her growing up in this environment, very poor, very uneducated, and she eventually makes the decision at the age of like 17 to go to high school and get her like high school diploma. She eventually like continues further into higher education, and it's just about like her relationship with her family. There's so many layers to it. Again, there's so many layers because being so uneducated at such a young age, she doesn't realize some of the things that are happening in her family can be fixed, and like how some of the things happening are really unhealthy because the dad doesn't believe in the education system, he doesn't believe in the government, he doesn't believe in like going to hospitals if you like are seriously injured. Like he doesn't believe in any of that. He thinks everything is like corrupt. You just watch, like your heart is breaking like as she's growing up in this environment, and she just doesn't realize how toxic the environment is. She thinks that's just how like everybody is grown up, and it's heartbreaking. But then you see her transformation like as she educates herself, as the book says, educated, as she educates herself and goes to school and like pursues her education. You see her like her whole world shifts, and it's so profound. It's like, I believe it's a memoir. It is like the best memoir I have ever read. Like I was just blown away by her writing and just her story in general. Like it was so heartbreaking, and it was like a roller coaster of emotions basically. Like you're just watching her and you want her to like succeed, and it's just like beautiful. It's just beautiful. And I gave that book a 5 out of 5 stars. Such a good book. I highly, highly recommend. The next book that I have to share with you is called Middle Game by Shannon McGuire. This is a thick, thick book. I can't believe I read this. And this isn't even the longest book that I read this year. But anyways, this book is another like, almost like fantasy, science fiction kind of, I don't know what it falls under. It follows these 2 siblings, Roger and Dodger. It's really hard to explain, but I'll read the back to you just so you understand a little better what this is about, because the back, it kind of perfectly illustrates like the picture, the whole picture. So it says, meet Roger, skilled with words, language comes easily to him. He instinctively understands how the world works through the power of story. Anything to do with language, any language, just anything to do with words. Meet Dodger, his twin. Numbers are her world, her obsession, her everything. All she understands, she does so through the power of math. Roger and Dodger aren't exactly human, though they don't realize it. They aren't exactly gods either. Not entirely, not yet. Meet Reed, skilled in the alchemical arts like his progenitor? That is a weird word. Before him, Reed created Dodger and her brother. He's not their father, not quite, but he has a plan. To raise the twins to the highest power, to ascend with them and claim their authority as his own. Godhood is attainable, pray it isn't attained. So Reed is after godhood, and he's using Roger and Dodger to accomplish this because of each of their affinities to language and math. And the story follows them as they grow up. They have this like connection between them, and you see each time that they get close to attaining godhood, but they're just like not quite there yet. And how Reed intervenes and like helps them along the way. And you kind of follow in like a broken timeline. It doesn't happen like chronologically. Things are happening out of order, so you have to slowly piece it together, and it's so interesting. It's so good. And like you're rooting for them, but also you don't want Reed to win because like Reed is this like really seedy character and you don't trust him. Ugh, it's so good. Like Shauna McGuire, this is my first book that I read from her. She outdid herself with this. It's so good, and I want to get this tattooed. Low-key, like very low-key. So good. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Again, I'm kind of stingy with my 5 out of 5 stars, but this year I gave quite a few. The next book I have to share with you, again, I don't have it with me because I got it from the library. It's called Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. It's kind of like a mystery, but with like fantastical elements to it. This was my first Leigh Bardugo book that I've read. Like I know she has a bunch of other books, but I have not gotten around to those. But I heard so many good things about Ninth House. Anyways, Ninth House is about this girl named Alex Stern. She's like college age. They don't really mention her age, but in the very beginning, you find out that she's found at the scene of a crime. The crime scene is that like all her friends have died and she's the only one left alive. You're trying to figure out throughout the book like what really happened that night. If you can hear my family, sorry about that. One mystery that you're trying to follow is like what happened this night, like how did her friends die, what happened, what was Alex's involvement in it. There's this other element that we find out very early on, like it's not a spoiler or anything, but Alex can talk to ghosts. And so after she's put through this like very traumatic experience at the very beginning of the book, she is like in the hospital, and then this man from, I think it's like Yale University, I don't remember off the top of my head, but he comes, visits her, and he knows about her ability to talk to and see ghosts. He recruits her to the campus to join this like secret society basically. Along the way, she has like a mentor and he goes missing. So you're not only following the mystery of like what happened that night of like this murder that happened to her, like the murder of her friends. You're not only trying to figure out that, but you're also trying to figure out where her mentor went, how he disappeared. And then on top of that, there's another murder. A girl is murdered on campus, but she like didn't go to that school. There's so many layers. I keep saying that there's so many layers, but you're trying to figure out these 3 different mysteries, and Alex is just trying to figure out her way through this school because it's all new to her. All this stuff. It's so good. I'm probably doing a really bad job of like explaining what this book is about, but just based off those 3 like mysteries, it's pretty intriguing, and they're all somehow like connected. It's insane. And this is like the first in a series, I'm pretty sure. There's like a second book coming out soon, I'm hoping in 2021. You never know. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. It was so good. So good. But it didn't give me that 5 out of 5 stars. Like, I read Middle Game right before I read Ninth House. And Middle Game was an automatic 5 out of 5 stars. I could not put it down. But Ninth House took me a little bit to get into, so I think that's why I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. But anyways, I still highly recommend it, especially if you are a fan of Leigh Bardugo's other work. I think that this would be definitely up your alley. All right, this is another, like, I know these are all like my favorites of the year, but this one is so good. This is another, actually, this is another one of Reese's book club books. Little Fires Everywhere was one of Reese's book club books. This one is also one of hers. Anyways, it's Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This one, I feel like I keep talking about murder mysteries in this top books of 2020 video. I guess murder mysteries just are my thing. But Where the Crawdads Sing follows this woman named Kaya who, well, you follow her throughout her whole life. So growing up in a very poor, again, a very poor, impoverished family. They're not very well educated. Kaya actually doesn't even go to school. She goes to school like one day in the entire book. And she doesn't understand like anything that's happening. She doesn't understand like societal norms. She doesn't understand what they're talking about in school. Like she doesn't understand anything. Like she's a very sheltered kid, and you follow her growing up alongside this other timeline. So the whole premise of the book is that this man named Chase Andrews is found dead in like the very beginning of the book in the year, I believe, in late 1969. So by 1969, Kaya is like a grown woman. So you're following the timeline of them in 1969 trying to figure out the murder of Chase Andrews alongside the timeline of just watching Kaya grow up. Hey guys, editing Amanda here. Sorry for my appearance, but I wanted to interject here for a second because I forgot to mention that the reason why you're following the timeline of like the murder of Chase Andrews in 1969 versus like the timeline of Kaya's life is because they suspect Kaya in 1969 of killing Chase Andrews because she was alluded to be involved with him. So I just wanted to clear that up because I realized I didn't mention it in my like little synopsis of what the book is about. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And she's referred to as the Marsh Girl because she lives out in the marsh and she doesn't have an education. She just lives out in the marsh by herself, trying to scrounge up enough money to like live for herself. It's so good. It's so profound. I loved this book so much. I listened to the audiobook as well along with reading the book, and it was the most pleasant experience I have ever had, like reading a book. This has been a big year of audiobooks for me, so like I've just been reading audiobooks along with reading in general, but this one really just topped the cake, if that's the expression. I highly recommend it. It's like a historical fiction type of book, so if you like historical fiction and you like a good murder mystery, this book is the book for you. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I know I said I was stingy with my 5 out of 5 stars, but like this year I just read a lot of really good books. So yeah, I highly recommend you pick up this book. So the next book I have for you is another book that I got from the library, so I don't have it with me anymore, but it's called Joyland by Stephen King. This is actually my first Stephen King book that I've ever read, and boy was it good. It was another murder mystery. The book is set in 1973 in like this North Carolina amusement park. The main character, Devin, he's like 21 and he takes a job at the Carney, like just working at the amusement park. And this amusement park is known for like this vicious murder that happened like a decade ago. I don't know. I don't remember. But like there's this vicious murder that happened in one of the rides. This woman was found, like she went into the ride and then came out and she was dead. This murder basically came to like a dead end. Like nobody could figure out what happened to this woman, who she was with, yada yada yada. All of a sudden when this guy Devin comes to the amusement park, he starts to like uncover the mystery of what happened to this woman, all while just working the summer at this amusement park. He meets a lot of people along the way, his coworkers, then he meets like this woman who lives in the town and her son, and he spends a lot of time with them. It's like very, I don't know, it sounds pretty boring based off of what I am describing it as, but I really enjoyed it. I loved all the different relationships he created, especially with like the woman and her son. Her son is like disabled. Sorry if the camera angle changed at all. My battery ended up dying in the middle of my sentence. So anyways, I was talking about Joyland. I know my description of it, of like the plot, is like not the greatest. It has been a while since I read it, but I do remember that I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially like the murder mystery aspect of it. I really enjoyed Stephen King's writing. I really want to read more Stephen King this year. I read like 3 Stephen King books last year, but I have, let me see if I can show you. This stack of books right here is all just Stephen King books. So I want to read most, if not all of them, if I get the chance to. With that being said, I have a lot of books that I really want to read this year, so we'll see. Fingers crossed that I read more Stephen King. But anyways, I love Joyland. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. If you're a fan of Stephen King and you want not necessarily like a horror book, but you want more of a murder mystery book, then this is technically, like on the cover it says it's like a true crime. Not a true crime, but like a hard crime book. Then if that's what you're looking for, by all means pick it up. I highly recommend. The next book I have is, it's the first romance book of the year, you know? It's the first romance book in my top 10. So it's Normal People by Sally Rooney. If you haven't heard of this, where have you been? If you follow Noelle Gallagher, then you should know already that this book is not her favorite. But for me, it's a favorite of mine. It also has a Hulu show, and Noelle loved the Hulu show more than she liked the book. But that being said, I love the book. It's about these 2 people, Connell and Marianne. So they both live in the same small town. Marianne is like this like awkward loner, like she kind of like does her own thing. She doesn't really listen to like what other people say. She doesn't follow like societal norms, I guess, if that makes sense. She does what she wants and doesn't let other people tell her like what to do, basically. Like she doesn't take people's crap from them, like, if that makes sense. So on the other hand, Connell, he just kind of follows along, goes with the flow. He kind of follows what everybody else is doing, kind of thing. And so they're both living very different lives, but they come together. They've known each other since like grade school, I believe, but in high school they come together and they kind of like start seeing each other, and then something happens. They kind of lose contact, and then they go off to college and they end up meeting up again in college, and it just kind of follows their lives together and apart, like, because they keep intersecting and then coming apart and then intersecting again. And so it's just really interesting. It's not like your typical romance, which is what I really enjoyed about it. I was rooting for them the whole time. I loved Marianne and Connell. I know some people think that like the pacing of this is kind of a bit off, and that like they didn't really like how they kept coming together and coming apart again and coming together again. But I really enjoyed it. I personally had a fun time with that, and a lot of people didn't really like how open-ended the ending was, but I like it because it's like, it's up to interpretation. However you want to interpret it, that's what I loved about it. So this is probably a very bad, again, description of what the book is about, but if you are looking for a fun little romance, I highly recommend. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I have is a very, very popular book from this year. Almost everybody on BookTube was like raving about this book. It's The Vanishing Half by Britt Benet. Let's talk about this cover real quick. I am in love with this cover. It is glorious. Like, these colors all just mash so perfectly together. Oh. It has some of my favorite colors too, like green, blue, a little bit of red and yellow. Ugh, so good. Anyways, this book is about two sisters. They both end up like running away from home at the age of like 15, I think. They go to like New Orleans, I believe, to live their lives. They're twins, so they're both mixed. Something happens in New Orleans while I think they're still 15 at the time. But basically, one twin leaves the other behind, and the one twin who leaves lives a life as a white passing woman, while the other twin lives a life as like a black woman in America. And it talks about like privilege and just like love and like the relationship. It was so good. I'm really bad at describing books, if you can't tell, but this was such a good book. Every single character in this book was so well thought out. Like, you get to meet one of the daughters of one of the twins, or you get to meet both of their children, but one of the daughters of the twins falls in love with like this trans man, and it like, the representation in this book was astounding. I was like so happy that they talked about, like, they did touch upon like body dysmorphia a little bit, being in love with a trans man, or just like a trans person in general, like some of the struggles. And it was just like, I love this book so much. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because, to be honest, I read this while I was in a reading slump, and I was just getting through it, like trying to like push through. So in the beginning, I wasn't really enjoying it that much, but I think that's just because of my reading slump. So I think if I had read this at a different time in the year, it would have been a 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. It fully deserves the hype that it got this year. And I believe this is another historical fiction, which, can we talk about it? I don't read historical fiction, but apparently this year I had some historical fiction favorites. I'm also finding, I think this was set in like the 1960s, and I'm finding that I think the 1960s are like my bread and butter for historical fiction, because even like Joyland was in like this 1973, so around that era. So 1960s, 1970s, I think that's my bread and butter. Anyways, let alone just the whole premise with like the one twin goes and lives a life as a white woman while the other twin lives her life as like a black woman. That alone is very interesting to me. So if that doesn't intrigue you, then I don't know what will about this book, okay? Pick it up. The next book I have to share with you is an audiobook, so I don't have it physically with me because obviously I listened to the audiobook, but it is called The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. The whole premise is that this woman and this man both share a flat, but not at the same time. Leon owns the flat, right? And he works the night shift as a nurse. And he decides to rent out the flat to like whoever, right? And so this woman, Tiffy, ends up like calling, and she ends up getting the flat. She's away at work from 9 to 5. So Leon has the flat from 9 to 5. Then he goes at night to his job as like the night shift nurse. And then so at night, Tiffy has the flat. And so that's how they share the flats. For the first like 6 months, they don't meet each other at all. They just communicate through like post-it notes around the flat. But then, this is a romance, guys. So, romance ensues. It is so cute. It is so flipping cute. I loved Tiffy and Leon together. Tiffy is this very bubbly personality. She is very personable, and she has like a big personality, while Leon is a bit more like, not necessarily shy, but just like reserved, and like he keeps to himself a little bit. and she kind of brings out the best in him and he brings out the best in her. I really enjoyed it. That's really all I can tell you about it, because there is more, but like obviously I can't tell you because then it'll ruin it. But I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I know a lot of people didn't really like this book because they didn't really like Leon, but I loved Leon, okay? He's like the kind of guy that like, he just grows on you, you know? I love them together. I love their dynamic. They were so like fun and flirty just through like the notes in the beginning, and then like as things progress and like escalate, like it just gets like so much more fun. And like Leon is so understanding of so many things, like so many of Tiffy's like little quirks and like her issues, and he's, wow, I loved it. Basically I loved it. If you can't tell already, I'm just gushing about the book. It also does touch on like gaslighting a little bit, and like the effects of like gaslighting and kind of like PTSD. So I thought that was really interesting for the author to touch on that subject, because I've never really read a book about gaslighting before and like the effects of gaslighting in a relationship. I really enjoyed that personally. I enjoyed that aspect of the book. So if that intrigues you, then please, I highly suggest you pick up the book. Especially listen to the audiobook, because I think the audiobook really enhanced my experience a bit, because they had like a different narrator for Leon versus for Tiffy. You could just feel the chemistry in the audiobook. It was amazing. Okay guys, the last book is another romance. I went on kind of like a romance kick at the end of the year, so don't mind me. But if you follow Noelle Gallagher, which if you're not, I don't know why you're here right now, subscribe here first, but also check out Noelle's channel, because I love Noelle. I love her so much. Like, she's gorgeous and her personality is just amazing and her reading taste is amazing. So anyways, this book was recommended to me by Noelle. She gushed about this book this whole year, and I can see why. It's called The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. Whew, boy was this steamy. I love this book so much. It was so good. Basically, the main characters are this woman named Lucy and this guy named Joshua, and they both work at the same publishing company. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was a publishing company. So they're co-CEOs of this publishing company. They work in like the same area. They kind of have their own like room together, where they share space, and they hate each other, like hate each other. But we soon find out that maybe it's not entirely hate. Maybe it's not really a hate relationship. Maybe, I don't know. But so what starts this story is that in the very like beginning of the story, they are pitted against each other for this promotion. Okay, yeah, sorry, I just had to like read the back to make sure. They don't really specify what kind of position it is that they're up for, but basically the premise is that whoever gets the position would be the boss of the other one. So Lucy obviously really wants the job because she wants to like be the boss of Josh, but then Josh really wants the job because obviously he wants the promotion, you know what I mean? Like, so we get to see them kind of battle it out, all the while playing this hating game. But is it really hate though? Is it really hate? Do they really hate each other? I don't know, but safe to say, romance ensues, and it is the steamiest, most fun book. It is so flirty and so fun, and I loved it so much. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. If you couldn't tell already by how much I'm gushing about this. And it was quite a fun way to end the year. I read this in December, and it was worth every single second that I read it. After a certain point, after I got past page like 100, I just like couldn't put it down. I read this book in like 4 days, and like that doesn't normally happen for me. It normally takes me a good amount of time to read a book, but this one was just so good I couldn't put it down. So I highly recommend, if you're in the mood for a good spicy steamy romance, then pick this one up. Okay, so we're gonna try to pick up all these books. Oh, okay, look at that. Okay, so this is all of my books minus like 3 of them, because those 3 I got from the library. But anyways, these are my top books of 2020. I hope you enjoyed. I'm gonna put these down before they fall. Leave me in the comments down below some of your top books of 2020. I'm really interested to see like what you guys are into and like what kind of books I should possibly be reading, like what books I didn't get to in 2020. Also, if you did read any of my top books from 2020, let me know your opinion of them down below. Let me know if you agree, maybe if you disagree. Let me know. Yeah, just let me know in the comments down below. I will have my Goodreads link down below as well as my Instagrams down below. So don't forget to give me a follow over there. And yes, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful New Year's and like happy 2021, yay. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.